The beauty of Barbuda is in its nature, as well as its peaceful way of life. This is the story of a Caribbean paradise, which has been impaired by a natural storm and exploited for human greed. The island of Barbuda has a unique history, culture, and land tenure system that set it apart from the larger Caribbean region. From 1680 to 1830s, the island was leased to the Codrington family of England. They used the enslaved African population to raise livestock, which serviced the sugar plantations on the neighboring Antigua. In 1834, emancipation happened. The people of Barbuda were left to fend for themselves. This drove them to successfully develop an economy of agriculture, fishing, charcoal, and open-range livestock. Barbudans had communal land ownership which has preserved their community from the hazards of drought and domination. During the 19th and 20th centuries, Barbudans successfully coped with the alternating heavy rainfalls and droughts by switching from commercial cultivation to expanding livestock, keeping with the unique grazing wisdom. During wet periods, livestock roamed freely, feeding on shrublands unrestrictedly. During dry periods, livestock would assemble at the wells and Barbudans would round them up for butchering or exports. These activities gave Barbudans grounds to contend that they owned the island in common. This form of tenureship was formalized into the law through the Barbudan Land Act in 2007. Because of their high sensibility to the natural landscape through this tenureship, Barbudans were able to preserve much of the lush natural habitats. However, not everyone honored the Land Act. Calling the communal land ownership a myth, the Prime Minister, Gaston Browne, had the agenda to open up the island for foreign developers. In 2015, with the help of the PM, Hollywood celebrity, Robert De Niro, began a plan of large-scale development in Barbuda. The 2016 Act opened up Barbuda to more and more foreign investors who came in and planned their developments. In addition to Paradise Found, PLH, another American development company, signed a 99-year lease with the government on 425 acres of land. This was done without any consulting with the locals. Since then, other planned developments were happening all along the once untouched coastline. Just as the locals have feared, the new developments left severe damages on the existing ecosystems, the coral reefs as well as the wetland salt ponds along the coasts. The influx of development plans only accelerated with the arrival of Hurricane Irma, which hit the island on September 6, 2017.
Irma is a scary hurricane. 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 Is a scary hurricane. Irma.
"21 days later, the evacuation mandate is lifted. Hurricane Irma made landfall as a Category 5 storm. It destroyed nearly all of the island's landscape and infrastructure. This physical damage was widely publicized. Almost all modes of external transportation and telecommunication were destroyed. After 146, Barbuda became an isolated island in every sense of the word. When the Prime Minister arrived in Barbuda after 12 hours, Irma hit Barbuda. he saw the 95% structures were destroyed on the island, together with the development opportunities. Fearing for the arrival of Hurricane Jose that is approaching the island in 2 days, Barbudan authorities made the unprecedented decision by declaring the state of emergency. They began to evacuate and relocated the Barbudans to Antigua. By the evening of September 8, all 1,800 residents were evacuated before Jose hit. For the first time in 300 years, no one is living on the island of Barbuda. However, Jose didn't do much damage to the island. But the evacuation mandate is still on. While Barbudans were still trapped in Antigua, exemptions were made for certain groups of people. Relief teams, approved volunteers, and clean-up crews were preparing for the reconstruction in Codrington. UNESCO team flew immediately to the island to assess the damage of its heritage, while the government was seizing the opportunity to prepare for future development. A large strip of forest, the home of ancient trees and native animals, were cleared up by the government for a third international airport. People were reluctant to come back, while developers were eagerly encroaching into the land. A much larger 650-acre project invested by a US-based real estate was approved by the government without involving the local council or Barbudan people. 4 months after Irma, the Barbuda Amendment Act came into effect. By granting to Barbudans the right to purchase the land, it made possible the privatization of the land. It sped up the development for tourism, however reconstruction of the facilities for Barbudans come back are going slow. A 300-year tradition of communal land ownership has been dismantled since the state of emergency. Why was it in effect for so long? And how did it suddenly open up the floodgate of foreign funds and investment? Such discrepancy in the timescale leads us to more research into the post-disaster recovery. After 30 days Irma hit Barbuda, the local government with the support of UNDP, in partnership with Microsoft and with technical assistance from Engineers Without Borders, conducted building damage assessments. The second step is to train 45 volunteers from the public and private sectors. After that, Microsoft engineers used remote sensing for disaster assessments to collect preliminary baseline data. Teams of engineers and trained inspectors have gathered and trained millions of georeferenced data fields. At the same time, a questionnaire is dispensed to all Barbudan via a mobile phone application. The app helps Barbudans to self-inspect their houses and further collect on-site details for baseline dataset. The dataset of structures is assembled, filtered, and analyzed in real time, including use, ownership, level of damage, etc. The information is further recalculated and converted to the needed baseline, which are the base material for civil engineers and economists to calculate the estimation of damage and loss, which, in turn, provided the information needed by the World Bank to develop the recovery and reconstruction plans. The financial recovery needs of the hurricanes Irma for Barbuda consists of 2 parts: damage and loss. Damage refers to a total or partial destruction of physical assets existing in the affected area. In this equation, D is a disaster resilience coefficient whose value usually ranges from 1.10 to 1.35. The actual value will highly depend on the improved degree of construction standards. The Build Back Better principles contributed to a high coefficient value. Loss refers to changes in economic flows arising from the disaster. In this case, the recovery aim, which requires a full recovery of the economy, at the macro, sectorial and personal or household levels likely leads to a high estimation value. Similar calculations also apply to productive, infrastructure and cross-cutting sectors. The total recovery needs includes damage and loss comes to $222.2 million. The higher construction standards and prolonged time would inevitably increase this amount. The big costs of recovery generated from the assessment urges the Barbudan government to seek help in financing the reconstruction of the island. Many foreign countries and institutions were willing to lend a helping hand to Barbuda. Many of them are renowned establishments that are humanitarian and faith-based and are dedicated to helping countries in the wake of natural disasters. These international organizations have proven to be incredibly generous and supportive of Barbuda in its road to recovery. These international organizations often work together and are linked through their sponsors as they are funded by the mega-corporations and the global power nations of the world. Reports of their post-Irma financial aids can easily be traced on the institution's online platforms, raising both awareness and hope for relief efforts in Barbuda. In a statement from the PM in 2018, he expressed great gratitude to those who contributed to Barbuda's rebuilding. The support received from civil society and faith-based organizations can never be repaid. With the finances provided, we are on our way to rebuild Barbuda in a way that will make each of its residents more secure, more resilient, and more endowed to overcome any future challenges that climate change might bring. Propelled by the influx of foreign financial funds, the Barbudan government led by Brown was eager to bring in more investments to help in the effort of reconstructing homes and building the economy. In consequence, specific domestic policies were put in place. The Depositor Protection Trust, a program that provides benefits to eligible bank depositors. Citizenship by investment, an immigration policy that hands out citizenships to wealthy foreign investors. And the Antigua and Barbuda Investment Authority, which was set up to facilitate and support foreign direct investments. The foreign funds had lifted much of the financial burden off of the shoulders of the Barbudan government. However, the money was given not without strings. Many of these institutions made recommendations for how the funds were to be used. The most urgent funding came from CCRIF, the first multi-country risk pool in the world. The $6.8 million insurance payout was implemented in 14 days. However, its expenditure was untraceable. With the cooperation of WAITT and ICF, $0.8 million has been raised to specifically support Barbuda. While the amount is diminutive, it has been used for the most urgent relief. In December 2017, CDB signed the Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Loan for restoring infrastructures, education, water supply, and agriculture. However, there is a delay in its implementation. UNDP contributed to the recovery by implementing several programs funded by different nations and institutions. In July 2018, the EU gave a grant of $5.7 million to rebuild to higher resilience standards 150 houses in Barbuda. The duration was prolonged due to a complicated process of selecting identified beneficiaries. While financial aid for such pivotal sectors have been limited, investments for tourism were prioritized both in the amount of funding and the speed of implementation. The program for the new airport, with a cost of $50 million, began its clear-up even during the evacuation mandate. PLH Ocean Club also started its construction in 2019. While the urgent recovery needs of $222 million is still a big amount, these investment projects exceeded $500 million in 2 years. After learning this, we were perplexed by another question. Are these institutions really helping countries devastated by natural disasters and poverty? Or, perhaps, do they have other more malicious agendas? What we are about to say might shock the world. The One World Society has worked under the radar for decades. It is about time that we expose them for who they really are. What we are about to say is nothing but the truth. It begins with a storm. When Hurricane Sandy wiped out population, properties, and established systems, most people were devastated. But for some who belonged to the top 1%, who lived close enough to witness the destruction of the storm, but were perfectly sheltered from the impacts, they saw economic opportunities. On one December evening in 2013, Paul DeJoria, a billionaire who has had strong financial interests in global tourism businesses, Calvin Ayres, another billionaire of the entertainment industry, Bill Gates, a rich tech dude who always had shady side businesses, and Leonardo DiCaprio, a Hollywood celebrity and an eco-hypocrite, came together for a night of drinking and partying in Vegas. They talked about climate change, but not in the way you and I would talk about it. They were excited about what climate disasters could bring, economic opportunities. That evening, a master plan was created, a plan to build a world centered around tourism. As a person living in this world, to escape a natural disaster, you would subscribe to a way of living provided by their business, a way of living that takes you from place to place and converts you to a tourist, or nomad. Everyone shall be turned into a consumer of their tourism experiences and products. By the end of the night, the four men were drunk and excited. They named themselves the One World Society and began chanting, "One world. One dream. One world. One dream. One world. One dream." Immediately after that night, the four influential men went to work to execute their idea. Bill Gates, with all of his connections to tech and science groups like NASA and Esri, was able to convince his friend, Bill Nelson, who is the head of NASA, to join the efforts. Their first move was to set targeted areas. These areas were places around the world prone to natural disasters, already infiltrated by foreign investments, and have poorer existing infrastructures. NASA was more than happy to start working on mapping these targeted areas. Based on the many criteria laid out by One World, the Caribbean region was identified as a target area. With the targets mapped out, the One World Society started to collaborate with global hotel conglomerates and other foreign development investors to increase the economic vulnerability of these targeted nations. At the same time, DeJoria and Ayres were recruiting other senior members from the World Bank and the UN. Soon, they had a substantial following of group members. They all joined in the belief that the business proposal would make climate change a generator of financial profits. With the approach of the tropical storm season in the Caribbean, One World decided that they should work faster. They collaborated with the World Bank and UN to formulate a disaster response protocol in which they pressured local governments to sign agreements to. With these preparations, the targeted nations are primed to become grounds for their tourism businesses. Now, all they had to do was to sit back and wait for the disasters to hit to initiate the rest of their plan. Hurricane Irma struck the island of Barbuda with a Category 9 landfall. The moment One World had been waiting for finally arrived. Barbuda shall be their first testing ground. While the storm was rolling into Barbuda, the group employed their followers in NASA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and U.S. Weather to forecast the disaster in a dramatized way to heighten the public's fear. They showed manipulated satellite images and exaggerated social media voices to suggest that the storm would create unimaginable destruction. The anticipation of Irma made Barbudans as well as the rest of the world extremely anxious. This was what the One World Society had wanted. A state of emergency mandate was placed on all affected citizens. The local government had to enforce such a law because it had signed the disaster response protocol agreements, which included the state of emergency as a necessary step towards disaster relief. The next step was to prolong the state of emergency. In signing the disaster protocol agreement, the local governments also agreed to enforce prolonged state of emergency mandates, regardless of the severity of the natural event. With the prolonged state of emergency, the government delayed the recovery of necessary infrastructures like housing, electricity, water, healthcare, and schools. This was meant to further delay the return of the people. With the local people gone and with much of the existing building structures in disarray, the ground of Barbuda became a clean slate for One World to begin the next step of their plan. Irma caused undeniable destruction in Barbuda. However, it was Hurricane Jose that triggered a state of emergency that got people to evacuate the island. Why was the state of emergency following a storm that barely touched the island in effect for such a long period of time? During the state of emergency that kept Barbudans away, Bill Gates, the head of Microsoft, employed several of his leading engineers to assess the damages on the island. While pretending to assess these damages, the Microsoft team was also conducting a secret survey of the land suitable to build hotel infrastructure. Also, Barbudans had no choice but to report their personal demographic and property information through an online disaster damage questionnaire created by Microsoft. In the disaster damage report, One World inflated the cost of recovery needs. The first strategy is to extend the state of emergency and industry lockdown to create further economic inactivity and loss. They will kick you out of your workplace and ask you to pay for the economic loss that results from you not being able to work. The second strategy is the enactment of the Build Back Better plan, which proposed increased costs for the construction of more resilient structures. And therefore, the cost for recovery was also raised. The collection of information, the extension of the state of emergency, and the following economic stagnation and cost of rebuilding all contributed to the immense cost of the post-disaster recovery. This forced the local government to seek financial aid from foreign investors and coerced local people to give up their properties in order to pay for the financial burdens of living on their own land. For the final step of land grab, the World Bank, also a tool of the One World, collaborated with the World Travel Tourism Council to propose a recovery plan centered around tourism. They proposed that the only way for the local economy to recover was for them to grant access to land to foreign tourism developers and to accept tourism as the dominating industry that would help the country recover and to provide jobs for the locals. Now with the available land, One World was able to construct their tourism center here in Barbuda. One day, our beautiful homelands will suffer the same fate as Barbuda. One World worked with their satellite partners like the multinational tourism conglomerates, Discover Land Company, Air Group, and Apple Leisure Group to clear land and construct hotel infrastructures. Hotel and luxury resort developments like the Ocean Club were built during this time. The hotels now operate fully functionally for international tourists traveling to Barbuda. The Discovery Land Company and Ayers Group were eager to promote this luxury tourism experience in their hotel infrastructures. They even went as far as working with the local government to create a long-stay visa program that would allow foreign tourists to enjoy longer stays on the island. Through the devastating event that is Irma, the One World took full advantage of the people of Barbuda, and the island of Barbuda was transformed into a tourism hotspot. Barbudans returned to their island only to find that their homes now belonged to multiple foreign entities who were also building large-scale hotels right next to their houses. Every natural disaster shall be followed by the mass displacement of people who will be permanently removed from their homes. One World will take advantage of this absence of people to transform the land into tourist capitals by the construction of large-scale hotel infrastructures. However, the hotels owned by One World will not house typical traveling tourists. They will be used to house the roaming climate nomads of the world. Each nomad will need to pay for their stays at the hotels. They are limited to short stays in each of the hotels. During their visits, the nomads can participate in recreational activities offered by the resort but for which they need to pay. For locations around the world that are no longer inhabitable by humans, the land will be turned into destinations for disaster ruins tours where people pay to go on short excursions to. No one will have any permanent home, and everyone eventually will become a consumer of the lifestyle One World would be selling. In order to work in this world, one will need to service the tourism industry. One World will have full control of the state of all job markets. In fact, the globally nomadic lifestyle One World is trying to push for is already in progress. Digital nomadism encouraged by COVID-19 is already a popular way of life that made traveling during a pandemic a trend. But who do you think is benefiting from this? The luxury residences, hotels, and Airbnbs that the tech bros of the world are paying for. People who are no longer bound to one location by their jobs can now move anywhere in the world and contribute to the global tourism industry, which is steadily falling into the sole ownership of One World. This is the real climate crisis. We hope this is a wake-up call for all of you who are reading this from the comfort of your home. That beautiful home of yours would soon become One World's property, if we don't do anything about this. We hope you will join us in this fight to defend our homes and to stop them from ruling our world. Globally, people are being increasingly displaced by pandemics, wars, and extreme climate events, all of which can be attributed to the accelerating progress of climate change. Each year, more and more people are forcefully displaced from their homelands by climate. Today, about 89% of the global refugee population seek asylum from climate crises that have devastated their lands of origin. With more land becoming uninhabitable, the nomadic population worldwide is on the rise. NASA and Esri have identified areas of the world that would face the worst of natural disasters in the near future. The UN identifies the intensifying climate refugee crisis as one greatest challenge that we would experience in our history as a species. Tourism and hospitality, an industry that welcomes, entertains, and sustains living for migratory people or tourists, can provide for the needs of climate refugees. With much of the world in lockdown, the past 3 years of pandemic have also contributed to the epic decline of the tourism industry. A group of the leaders within the tourism industry, Richard Fain, founder of the Royal Caribbean Cruise, Baron Hilton, successor of the Hilton Corporation, and Robert De Niro, a Hollywood celebrity who has a history of benefiting from disaster capitalism in the Caribbean, recognized that their businesses are facing immense threats. However, they've also discovered the overlap between what the refugees need and what hospitality can provide. With this revelation, the hospitality business leaders saw this as their saving grace. Their facilities would be able to resume their pre-pandemic operations while climate refugees would be converted into their consumers, who they now referred to as climate nomads. By offering to accommodate and provide hospitality to the climate nomads, they requested disaster funds from the UN, the Red Cross, and the World Bank and became part of the disaster response relief team. By branding themselves as the industry that now provides hospitality in an increasingly inhospitable world, the group bestowed upon themselves a new name, the New Hospitality. With NASA and ESRI's mapping of disaster-prone areas, tourism cruise lines such as the Royal Caribbean Cruise, the Windstar Cruises, and many others developed cruise lines that travel to these areas where there are frequent extreme climate events and where people are most likely to be displaced. As part of the disaster responders, once a natural event occurred, the cruise lines accommodated the displaced people and served as safe temporary shelters. Cruise lines also provided transportation for the nomads to travel from hotel to hotel. UNDP, an institution that had previously worked on the post-disaster recovery plan, Build Back Better, proposed a newly revised plan, Built to be Destroyed. This is a guide that required all climate hotels to be designed as impermanent structures so that once they are destroyed in a climate disaster, the building elements could be easily salvaged and be reused to build the next hotel. To finance the hotels, the World Bank worked with local governments to generate the inflow of loans to support the construction of these new climate nomad hotels and the climate power generators, which harnessed natural disasters for energy. Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro became celebrity ambassadors for the institution. They believed in this mission of new hospitality and wanted to be a part of the climate nomad movement. They shared their experiences on the journeys and influenced more people and celebrities to join the movement. With more climate disasters occurring almost every day, the population of climate nomads grew significantly. Also, with the relentless, incomprehensible loss that came with climate change, people began to lose faith in the conventional systems of disaster response and the network of institutions that pushed for permanent properties based on monetary values, like the bank and the dollar system. By taking photos of every remarkable moment and storing the memories in the cloud, people come to embrace images as remediation for their post-disaster life. Superworld and Disasters Fighters, two organizations that were already working with the World Bank to apply the use of NFTs to disaster reliefs in the Caribbean, proposed a new value system based on nomadic memories, documentations of the experiences, stories, and temporary kinships that the climate nomads collect as they traverse the land of the world. This new currency places value on the memories of objects, places, and kinships that no longer exist. As a value system and a philosophical idea, the memory value system beautifully celebrates the ephemerality and the resiliency of nomadic life. The World Bank became a centralized bank for memories. Microsoft and its team of digital architects built the Memory Cloud, a free storage service that nomads can subscribe to archive their memories. Microsoft facilitated the sharing of memories by developing technologies to project the nomads' memories onto the physical space. With this technology, the space of the climate hotels and cruise ships became the hubs of cultural exchange. With each social interaction that takes place within the hotel, the physical space was transformed to express the sharing of memories. This new form of socializing became a way for refugees to recognize their shared experiences of being displaced. During the sharing of memories, new kinships and identities were formed on the basis of travel trajectories. Those with similar travel trajectories became the new kins. Existing religions became more nature-oriented to explain the high frequency of natural disasters. Many of them failed to explain the new global climate conditions with their existing theologies. The new hospitality group absorbed other nature religious groups and accepted nomads who needed to cope with the incessant loss and the unpredictability of climate change. UN, an institution working with the new hospitality and an organization that has had extensive experiences working with climate refugees, ascended to the position of the ultimate leader in the building of a global nomadic civilization. It cooperated with NASA, World Bank, the Red Cross, Microsoft as well as other hospitality companies to support nomadic life by preparing displaced people for their nomadic journeys. As a world that now experiences daily climate disasters, the new hospitality became a religious way of life for the climate nomads. Upon displacement, people are converted into climate nomads through initiation ceremonies hosted by the Red Cross. All those who wander are never lost. The climate nomads follow the spiritual guidance of the new hospitality as they navigate through their new dynamic, exhilarating, and adaptable lives.
We shall commit to experiencing migrations.
We shall upkeep our devotion to our nature deities who appear in the forms of natural events.
We will signify our devotion to nature and to each other by the relentless act of building and rebuilding.
And we shall never be lost, for we shall always be willing to accept feelings of renewal and freedom as we depart for the next journey.
Lead us, the saints of nature. Guide us with your mighty storms and your nurturing resources, for we shall follow you. We are the wanderers of your earth, and may we abide in union with each other.